It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce Bill Keidan from the Wellington branch. Bill joined the Theosophical Society in England when he was 16 years of age. He was 26 when he migrated to Perth in Western Australia and joined the Perth Lodge. He had an opportunity to meet one of his neighbours, who was none other than Geoffrey Hodson, and his wife Sandra, who had come to live in Perth. So during this time, Bill saw this distinguished Theosophist couple practically every day for 9 months whilst living in Perth. So he received many personal insights and anecdotes, and some of those were about the angels, on which Mr Hodson was probably the greatest living theosophical teacher of his age at that time. Later, Bill became the president of the Perth Lodge for 3 years. He moved to New Zealand in 2008 and serves on the Wellington Committee. Bill's topic tonight is the Angelic Kingdom in nature. So welcome, Bill. We're looking forward to it. Over to you.
Thank you, Simon and friends. Great to see such a great turnout. Next. Friends, as I'm sure many of you are fully aware, the Angelic Kingdom is a kingdom of nature which runs parallel to the human kingdom. This is a chart from Mr. Dasa's book, First Principles of Theosophy, and he shows how these two streams of evolution have developed. This is based, of course, on clairvoyant research. By far the largest input is along the lines of the Angelic Kingdom, and you can see the human kingdom derives through mosses, ferns, flowering plants, trees, lower animals, greater reptiles, mammals, and into men or humanity, disciples and adepts, and then on to the great Daihan, Chohans, and all the rest appear to be fed into the angelic line. And you can see, or rather, I hope you can see from the chart, you know, that although at some stages they are developed along physical lines like bacteria, insects, or bees and birds, etc., but eventually they become totally etheric and move into the angelic, invisible angelic kingdom. So that's a very interesting chart for students of how the angelic line of evolution develops. Next, and here's the great book itself. I first saw this in our public library in the town in which I grew up in England, called Sunderland. I think a theosophist had arranged for it to be put into the public library, and I was absolutely amazed at the content. Next. Therein I saw the illustrations based on Mr. Geoffrey Hodson's direct, intuitive, clairvoyant perception. Fairies, elves, gnomes, thought to be fairy tales by so many people, yet when explained by Mr. Hodson, you could understand their place in the scheme of nature. And my first mentor, who called on me shortly after I joined the Theosophical Society, was a local headmaster. And he told me quite a lot, because he was partly clairvoyant himself. And he said to me that these elemental beings sometimes do unusual things. And he said, for example, his own brother had a trick played on him, and a photograph was taken, and the nature spirit had replaced his brother's head with its own head, which appeared on the photograph. And he said to me that quite often in photographs, you can see elemental beings or parts of them. And so I started looking at my own photographic collection, and I'd been up in the English Lake District on a biology field trip, and this is what I saw there. Next, please. This is a ginkgo tree, one of the most ancient trees on our planet, a sort of living fossil. And in the grass beside it, when I closely examined the photograph, there were these two little heads of grass elves. Next, please. This is an enlargement, and you can see that the two heads, I suspect that these grass elves, they were just able to imprint the etheric matter strongly enough so it reflected on the photographic plate. Next. And I drew a little sketch of what I saw there, that to me, they're as clear as day. So that was part of my early experience. That they appeared in some of my photographs. Later on, when I came to know Mr. Hodson and read in detail some of his writings, he explained how his book, The Kingdom of the Gods, came about. He was on board ship, and by that time he'd written 2 books on the fairy and elemental kingdoms, called the Fairies at Work and Play, 1925, and The Kingdom of Fairy, 1927. And he and his first wife were on board ship, I think coming from India, from Adjar, and this family approached him, and the Quayle family. Next. And they said, "Are you the Mr. Geoffrey Hodson who wrote the books on the fairies?" And he said, "Yes, I am. I hope you found them believable." And they said, "Oh, yes, we've read everything that you've written, and we totally believe and find them very credible. Now, Mr. Quayle was quite an important person in the sense that he lived in South Africa, and at that time they were building this wonderful hospital in Cape Town. Next, please. Called Geological Hospital. It was highly funded by the government and was built on a site which previously was owned by Cecil Rhodes below this famous landmark called Devil's Peak. And it was at this hospital back in the 1960s that the great and famous Professor Christian Barnard did the first human heart transplant. So it was became a very famous hospital. And Mr. Quayle was the quantity surveyor. He did the quantities for the hospital, and very functional. Next, please. And this was his daughter, Ethel Wynn, or known as Wynn, and she was an all-round artist, a wonderful artist. In fact, one of her friends, I got to know this from her son, who wrote to me. He'd seen my Geoffrey Hodson website, and he emailed me and told me quite a lot about Wynn's background. She was a sculptor and a great graphic artist as well. In fact, one of her friends submitted one of her sculptures to the Royal Academy in London, and they were so impressed by it that they put it on display. And she offered to paint angels according to Geoffrey's description. And next, please. She'd also done the artwork for the pediments of Geological Hospital, all these sculptural decorations. And so her capacity was really quite incredible. And they offered, I think about a year later after they met Geoffrey on board ship, they offered for the Hodsons to stay with them at their lovely residence at St. James in Cape Town. Next, please. That's the Quayle residence. And while they were there, Wynn said that she would be very happy to paint the angels according to Geoffrey's descriptions. So they spent many weeks going out into the mountains, and Geoffrey would look clairvoyantly over the mountains and see the presiding devas, angels, and describe them to Wynn. Next. And that's an example of one of Geoffrey's sketches and the finished artwork. This is a great landscape angel presiding over a mountain in the Drakensberg ranges in South Africa. Next, and here's Wynn at work on another important piece of artwork. Next, and this is a finished painting of a Kundalini Deva. Some of the paintings were described to Wynn from Geoffrey's memories. Others, they were described in vivo as Geoffrey looked at them on site, as it were. Sometimes he would spend 3 days looking over the mountain ranges, getting every detail, and Wynn, being the wonderful artist she was, painted them according to his precise descriptions. Next, this is the Borobudur. This is a wondrous Buddhist monument, and estimated to be built in 800 AD. Took 75 years to construct, and it was totally buried in the jungle in Indonesia, and was restored, or was rediscovered in 1814 and restored by the famous Sir Stamford Raffles, who established Singapore, and the British were a governing power in that region, in Singapore, in the Far East, in Indonesia for that time, and it was obviously in a poor state of repair, and through wondrous engineering and various United Nations funding, the project was restored to something of its old glory. Next. This shows some of the detail of the terraces of the Borobudur. Apparently, they portray scenes of the life of the Lord Gautama Buddha. What a wonderful testimony to that great religion. And as you would expect, it's presided over by a wondrous angel, a great archangel, in fact. Next. This is the Angel of Java, which you can read about in Geoffrey's book, The Kingdom of the Gods. Some interesting points about this great being. You can see the great lines, the great rays of energy that are thrown out by it, which go right over the island of Java and that region. And high in the aura is a silver star of initiation. And Geoffrey said that whenever you see, or if you're fortunate enough to see, a great archangel like this, which has concentric colors in its aura, that is an indication that it has achieved adeptship in the human kingdom and then transferred to the angelic kingdom after it's reached liberation. So that obviously applies in this particular case. A wondrous being.
Bill, may I say something?
Yes.
Just a question, really. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, you attain adeptship, and, you know, the human being then, the superhuman being, has those 7 roads to choose or go by for the next steps. And obviously they can choose to become as part of the angelic kingdom.
Yes,
along that line.
That's one of the pathways that opens after adeptship. Indeed. Next, another great illustration from the kingdom of the gods, the World Mother, and here is another subline of service that can be taken. Those of you who have studied the Theosophical teachings will be familiar with the idea that when the mother of Jesus died, she was supposed to be translated to heaven according to the Bible. In actual fact, she became an adept. Geoffrey said that many of the people who surrounded Jesus themselves were very great initiates, and some of them did become adepts shortly after their lives with Jesus. And apparently the Lady Mary was one of those, and she was given this office in the angelic hierarchy, which we know as the World Mother, wherein she presides over the births of animals and particularly humans. She or one of her representatives, who of course being connected with her order tend to look rather like her, are always present at the birth of every animal, and especially every baby, every human baby. So she does wondrous work to help, and can still be reached by those who know how. Next. Yes, an angel of music known as a Gandharva. You see that projection from the throat chakra in angelic iconography. You often see angels sitting on a cloud playing trumpets, and apparently that's what the trumpet is. It's a sort of symbol of this projection from the throat chakra by which they manifest divine sound. In one of my angelic talks, I mentioned that, and this is currently in the news with the new Elvis Presley film, which has come out, that when Elvis Presley died, there was a cartoon in the newspaper showing him ascending to heaven, sitting on a cloud, playing a trumpet with the sheet music. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. But the iconography of the angel playing a trumpet is quite pervasive, and it's often seen in artwork. But that's apparently the archetype from which it is derived. Next. Yes, another wondrous painting from the kingdom of the gods. A rose angel, an angel which is the embodiment of divine love. It was C.W. Leadbeater who first told us that the pure pink of love is not all that common. You see, what human beings call love is often has an admixture of selfishness, and it tends to make the color a little muddy rather than that pure rose color which is represented here. C.W. Leadbeater said that where you do find this pure rose love, it's more often seen in the love of a mother for her baby, love which is given out without any selfish thought of return. But I believe that Geoffrey saw this rose angel in one of the Masonic rites, which is linked to love. So it appeared in a pure form in that ceremonial activity. Next, yes, a Lord of the Tree Ferns. It's a strange thing, friends, that angels of particular orders often take the form of the vegetation or the animal that they actually represent. So in this case, you can see how the fronds of the tree ferns are represented in the auric energies of this wondrous god, which takes on certain appearance representative of the tree ferns which he presides over. Next, yes, healing angel. There are many orders of healing angels. This is a particularly beautiful one that Mr Hodson saw. He envisaged it appearing when this little child or infant had fallen down some steps, and it was pouring healing energies into it to comfort and heal it. Next, this is a picture of Perth in Western Australia. As Simon said at the outset, I migrated to Perth it was in 1972, and little did I know that within a few months of me joining Perth Lodge, that Mr and Mrs Hodson were going to come and live there. And not content with that, the property manager of Perth Lodge, next please, the property manager of Perth Lodge decided that he was going to go to England and visit some relatives for a year, and he knew that I was interested in Geoffrey's work, and he said, "Bill, would you like to take over my flat while I'm away?" Well, what do you think, friends? I grabbed that opportunity, and so when the Hodsons actually arrived to live in another flat there, I was already installed as their neighbour. And yes, I saw them practically every day. I was invited into their flat when I came home from work, and Geoffrey shared lots of anecdotes, even showed me his slide collection, about 3 Kodak carousels of slides of his adventures around the world, because he traveled around the world about 3 times, and everywhere he went, he was connected with various activities, some of it angelic, other people came to him for other reasons. And he told me that in every country that he went to, a great angelic representative would appear to him and ask him how it could be of assistance to him while he was there, and offered advice on places where he could go and commune with the angelic beings of that country. Next, Yes, this is Geoffrey and his second wife, Sandra. Next. And that was 9 months later. What happened was that the state government was resuming our premises, and the accommodation, of course, was becoming a bit unsteady. And coincidental with that, a wealthy businessman in Auckland, where Geoffrey and Sandra had previously been living, a wealthy businessman who was a leading member of the Theosophical Society. They so wanted Geoffrey and Sandra to go back there that they offered them a house at a peppercorn rental if they would return. So we lost them, and our loss was Auckland's gain. But that was the farewell function at Kalamunda in Perth, high in the hills above Perth. But I'd made the contact with them and even had the privilege of being accepted into their inner circle, part of their inner family. And so I retained the link with the Hodsons, corresponded with them for the next 10 years of Geoffrey's life, and was even able to go and visit them on one occasion with a friend. Well, after Geoffrey's death, I became quite active in angelic work. I reconstructed a project that Geoffrey had started called the Brotherhood of Angels and of Men, which I renamed the Brotherhood of Angels and of Humanity. So as women wouldn't feel excluded. And I was on long service leave from my job, which was with the Australian Immigration Service, and I got a telepathic message, a strong telepathic message to travel over to Tongariro National Park in New Zealand, which is where Geoffrey did some of his great angelic research. But I had no money at the time. This was an amazing situation. I definitely needed to do this trip. And then I was notified by my employer that they had underpaid me $5,000. And of course, that came just at the right time. It funded my trip to New Zealand. So off I went and stayed at a hotel in Auckland. Next, please. And across the bay, across the Hauraki Gulf, as it's called, from Auckland, is this island called Rangitoto Island. And it's mentioned in one of Geoffrey's subsequent angelic books, and it has an angel presiding over it. Like so many places in Auckland, it's an extinct volcano. So I traveled over to Rangitoto Island by ferry. And next, please. Whilst I was there, I visited the lava caves. These are caves which have been formed from the volcanic activity. And it was pretty rough going, the ground there. And believe it or not, I fell over and I gashed my forearm, and I heard this laughter. It was like laughter of children, yet I was the only person there. There were no other people in sight, and I thought, this is very strange. However, I picked myself up. I had a first aid kit with me, and I patched up my gash, where the blood had poured onto the ground, and I continued my journey. I went back to Auckland. Next, please. And I caught the train down to Tongariro National Park, which is where I was intending to go in the first place. This is called the Whakapapa village, and that's the so-called chateau. It was built, I think, in the 1920s to service the ski fields, which you can see in the background there on one of the 3 volcanoes that exist in that area. I didn't actually stay at the chateau at that time. I stayed at another hotel, which is slightly higher up the mountain, called the Scotel. Next, please. That's a picture of the Scotel, which has the beautiful view over the volcanic mountains, Tongariro and Narahoe. The smaller one is Tongariro, and the larger one is Narahoe. Yet, as things go, the geological formation is that the Tongariro is the primary one, the smaller of the two is the primary volcano, and the Narahoe, larger one, is secondary to that. And this area is also the site of one of the great walks of New Zealand, in fact, of the world. I was going to go on this walk and set out to do so, but I'd taken a backpack which was really too heavy. That the walk actually took about 7 hours, and it goes through these 2 volcanic mountains, and it can be quite heavy going, especially in the early stages. It's called the Tongariro crossing. So what actually happened was I'd started the crossing. Next, please. And I found that this backpack that I'd taken was really too heavy, and I decided to turn back. And this is a signpost which shows the backtrack back to the Whakapapa village. So I started walking back to where I came, and decided I'd have to do the Tongariro crossing on another occasion. Anyhow, what had happened was that the pathway back had been washed out by some heavy rains that they'd had. In mountain weather, you get these storms happening all the time, and it often makes the existing pathways waterlogged. And so the way back was a bit of a struggle, and I found myself slipping and sliding along the path on the way back. And at one stage, I slipped over seem to make a habit of doing that on these trips. And on the way down, a twig must have hit one of my ears and gashed it, and so there was more blood spilt on my clothing and on the mountain. And next, please. And this is where it happened. You can see it's pretty tough terrain. And again, I heard this childlike laughter, like little children laughing. Again, there was no one around to be seen. And I realized, finally, the penny dropped, that these were elementals, and they weren't so much laughing at my misfortune, but they were sort of rejoicing that I had been initiated on the side of the mountain. And as my blood fell on the ground, it formed a imperishable bond with me and the mountains and the Davic and elemental life of the area. So I picked myself up and started my journey back to the Scotel again. As I was walking back about a few hundred meters, I bumped into a crowd of American tourists who were going in the other direction, and they looked rather aghast as they saw me covered with blood, but they were very nice, and they helped me clean myself up, and I put a mountain jacket on and got back to the Scotel and had a good shower and had a complete cleanup while on my return. Now, in meditation, I had been told by telepathically that I would meet the presiding deity of Tongariro before I left the area. And next, please. This is the decking of the Scotel. As you can see, there's a lovely view across Mount Tongariro and the bigger Narahoe, the sister peak. So before I left, I went up onto the decking and sat down in meditation and looked over the mountains. And within a few minutes, I found that my visual field totally changed to this apple green color. Next, please. Something like that. Blindingly brilliant green. Next. And then what happened was that these two rows of angels, I believe, Gandharvas, as previously described, came out from the mountain, from Tongariro, and you can see that they have these throat chakrams, expanded throat chakrams. So I believe they were Gandharvas or angels of music, announcing the presence of their Davic Lord, the Lord of Tongariro. And then this wonderful chakra-like form appeared, full of brilliant colors. Now, I've tried to sketch some of the colors, but there were many colors there which were astral and I've never seen on earth before. And then I heard the voice of the Davic Lord. He welcomed me to his domain. He said that it was unfortunate that I had to have this accident on his mountain, but it was necessary that my blood be mixed with the mountain for the link to be made with him and the elemental beings for now and into the future. And he told me many interesting things about the destiny of this area. It's an acupuncture point on the Earth's surface, and he said that it will become an initiation spot not only for Australia and New Zealand, but will service large parts of the southern Pacific Ocean in the future. People will come there for awakening processes. And then the wonderful experience died down, and I got myself packed and went to the railhead by taxi and left to return to Auckland and flew back to Perth. Next, this is a picture of the chateau. Subsequently stayed there on other visits to Tongariro National Park. Next, in fact, that's myself and Sylvia in the dining room there at the chateau. Next.
You're looking very dapper, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. That's the lovely driveway at the chateau. And as I said, Geoffrey and Sandra had stayed at the chateau and he'd done some angelic clairvoyant investigation there. Next. Oh, that's myself and Sylvia on the driveway. Next. And there's Geoffrey, same driveway, just to show that he actually had a presence there. Next. This is his book, Clairvoyant Investigations. He found another artist, very good amateur artist here in New Zealand, who painted additional angelic visions that he had. Of course, Wynn was once in a lifetime artist, but this artist was very competent, and this book has some very interesting illustrations in also. Next. And that's Geoffrey's version, obviously much more detailed than mine, of the Davic Lord of Tongariro. And you can see how this green coloration entered into my own humble version, because there is a great amount of green in the aura in the painting that was done according to Geoffrey's description. And also of significance as the Kundalini like forces that are to be seen in this deva. In fact, in this volcanic area, there are many great Kundalini devas. Part of their work is connected with the volcanic fires and the evolving life in those realms. But another part which is extremely relevant to us is that the Kundalini forces are important in the awakening of human beings, and that's why this will become a great center of initiation in the future. Next, I think we're running out of time here. This is a painting of the Archangel Bethelda, who appeared to Geoffrey many, many years previously in the Shepscombe Valley in Gloucestershire. Next. He was lying on this hillside overlooking this beech forest, and this archangel called Bethelda, which apparently means the angel of the house of God, appeared to him, and that was his entree point to the greater beings. As I mentioned, he'd done a lot of work in connection with the elemental nature spirits, but Bethelda introduced him to the greater angels and archangels. And there are so many aspects to Geoffrey's life. Next, when he was living in New Zealand in the 50s, he met Princess Te Paua, Maori princess, and she was a repository of a great deal of Maori lore about the angels and especially the nature spirits. Next. In fact, one of the nature spirits is portrayed on this stamp of New Zealand. Don't ask me to pronounce the Maori word, but it's quite deeply embedded in Maori folklore, contact with the fairy folk. Next, I've left a lot of illustrations out, largely due to copyright problems, but there's an awful lot on the internet if you're interested. I might just mention in passing Dr. George Campbell, who corresponded with me some years ago. He used to be a public servant, and in his lunchtime he'd go and meditate in a Christian church near his office in Melbourne. And through that process alone, his inner faculties opened up, and he discovered a brand new form of mathematics, and a famous American mathematician got him enrolled just on the basis of this alone into the Australian National University, who gave him a PhD based upon this new form of mathematics which he discovered, which he attributes to being inspired by angelic forces. And his clairvoyant faculties opened up. This is an illustration of angels that he saw in the Melbourne Botanical Gardens. Next, and this is a particularly beautiful landscape angel of Ayers Rock, or Uluru in its Aboriginal language. Great presiding angel of the rock. So in conclusion, I have this quotation from a mountain god. Next, don't know if you can read that. This is given to Mr. Hodson. The gods await the conscious reunion of the mind of man with the universal mind. Humanity awakens slowly, matter blinded through centuries. Few men as yet perceive the mind within the substance, the life within the form. In search of power and wealth, men have traversed the whole earth, have penetrated the wilds, scaled the peaks and conquered the polar wastes. Let them now seek within the form, scale the heights of their own consciousness, penetrate its depth in search of that inner power and life by which alone they may become strong in will and spiritually enriched. He who thus throws open his life and mind to the universal life and mind indwelling in all things will enter into union therewith, and to him the gods will appear. Amen to that, friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Amazing, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Any
that was a very
questions or comments? Go
that
on,
was a very wonderful presentation, sir. Mr. Bill, thank you very much.
Oh, pleasure.
Okay, just raise your hand, or and I'll scroll through. We'll just make a comment. That'll be fine. Hang on. Ah, Pam, yes, go, Pam.
Very uplifting. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say I had an experience myself. I don't see Davis or anything like that yet, but occasionally I see glimpses of colour, and I'm thinking about the rose angel you showed. I was at a family wedding of some young friends of ours, and I saw this layer of pink across the people, and I thought, oh my God, and the hills, and I thought, oh my goodness, what's that? And
There you are.
and it took me a while to realize that they had a very pure love for each other, and how
Yes.
unusual, as you say, and they definitely do, this couple. They've got a little boy, and they're really wonderful parents to this child as well. So I just thought I'd share my own little tiny experience.
Yes, yes, very significant, I think. And, you know, for that matter, Pam, these experiences come to different people in different ways. I've read a lot about angelic law, and I've read experiences of people who've had first contact with the angels or the nature spirits, and it often happens quite unexpectedly and in many different ways. So I think it's good to be open, you know, and of course at a wedding celebration or other events of devotional significance, many people are open and they tune into these things just automatically. I've had a, you know, I don't claim to be a Geoffrey Hodson, but I have had isolated psychic experiences, and they usually come when you're in a devotional frame of mind or relaxed. So just be prepared in that sort of way, friends. And because I think some people dismiss things as just their imagination, but actually a lot of these things are not imagination. They're intuitions from the invisible world, and maybe precursors of what is to come in the future.
Okay, before I get to you, Esther, I'll just go to comments. The chat. Arnie has said, fascinating talk, Bill, and thanks for sharing those images. Question: did Geoffrey Hodson and Dora Coons ever happen to meet?
Geoffrey didn't actually tell me that he'd met Dora, but I imagine they did at some stage, yes. I mean, Geoffrey spent a lot of time in North America lecturing, and I'm sure that he would have bumped into Dora at some stage. I mean, even I bumped into Dora at one stage, just fleetingly, but I'm sure they would have come into contact.
Oh, Esther.
I just want to say thank you, Bill, for your beautiful talk, the illustrations and sharing of your personal experiences. Very valuable. And as you were talking and showed that, I mean, I'm from Australia and very much interested in our Indigenous culture and have been to ceremonies and welcomings, and I'm reminded of how our First Nation people, when they go into country with new people, they talk to the spirits, the devas, the elementals, to please not be mischievous and to please welcome these people in an honourable way. And in that way they approach any river, any meadow, any landscape form. And I'm also reminded of the song lines. You know, Aboriginal culture has history and stories embedded in landforms, and the danger of them being mined is that connection with the devas and that spiritual wisdom is, those stories are also being lost in connection with the land. So yes, it all brought that to me and gave reason, and the fact that they put earth on themselves as a way of protection as well, or as a way of honouring an area that they go into. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Esther. I totally agree with everything that you've said. And when I was living in Australia, we heard from Mr. Cyril Havocker, who himself was made a blood brother of a Aboriginal tribe on Groot Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria. And they told him a lot of information indicating, in fact, he wrote a book about it, indicating that the Aboriginal people have their own theosophy. It's their own indigenous form of theosophy, and includes all the sorts of things that we study, auras and such like, and you know, and the devas. But of course, what happened was that they kept it secret because they knew exactly what the narrow-minded Christian missionaries and government officials would do to their deeper teachings. But they initiated Cyril Havocker into the tribe, and he became a recipient of detailed information of these inner workings.
Would you have the title of the book at all, Bill?
Well, I used to actually have it, but I've either given it away or I just can't remember the title. I'm sorry, it slipped my memory. But if you Google Cyril Habakkuk,
How do you spell that?
Surname Havecker, I think.
Habakkuk.
Cyril, spelt in the conventional way.
Okay, Chris.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
yes.
that's good. Yeah, not sure. Thank you, Bill. Enthralling. I mean, it's such a beautiful subject to speak on, and also, of course, your personal experience of it adds to that. I just wanted to say, I think you made a comment somewhere that reminded me that probably at least at the lower level of nature spirits, for those of us who love gardening, they're probably more often visible than we realize.
Yes.
Because, you know, we just don't take the notice, or perhaps, speaking for myself, I don't have that expectation. You know, I think, oh, I won't see anything. But I did have one experience of being in quite a remote bush area with a friend who said to me, I feel the presence of the nature spirits here. And I was looking around and saying, well, I'm trying to see something. I'm not sure if I'm imagining it because you're directing me, you know. But a crowd of tourists were there who were chattering in a foreign language very loud, and it was kind of difficult to concentrate. And she said to me, let's sit and wait a while because I think they might leave. And they did. And once they left and it was quiet, it was much easier then to pick up the energy that was there. And she took some photographs, and we saw the little faces in the photographs. And so, yeah, so I don't know whether sometimes they choose to be seen on photographs, and maybe sometimes they choose not to be.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, I mean, probably several of us will start looking at their nature photographs more closely now. They're often little faces blending into rock formations and things like that. And I mean, you saw the heads of the grass elves that I picked up. I wouldn't have noticed them if my mentor hadn't said that they often do appear on photographs. So it's worth a look. Of course, the other thing is the direct contact. An author called Michael Rhodes is well worth reading. He tells how he was just doing some gardening or messing around in a stream, and the god Pan just made himself known to him. Now, how could how could you pick that was going to happen? You know, I mean, it can come out of nothing, basically. And basically, if they have some reason for wanting to contact you, then it'll happen. In my own case, it was obviously connected with the work I'd been doing with the Brotherhood of Angels and of Humanity, and it was meant to give me some form of encouragement. But other people serve in different ways, and they're likely to be contacted, you know, maybe for different reasons.
Thank you, Bill. Is it still possible, Bill, to see those ruins at in, where was it, Java?
Oh, well, they're no longer
Borobudur.
ruins. You know, the Borobudur was taken under the arm of UNESCO, and it's an international treasure now. So you can go and visit, walk along the terraces. Just to think that the whole thing was totally covered in jungle until it was discovered in the 1800s, rediscovered. So yes, you can go there if you can afford to.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Esther's big cat.